"Dad, you're not in your right mind. You're too old to manage your own estate." That's what my daughter told the probate judge, the same daughter I once made a millionaire before she turned 30. My name is Walter Gaines, 71 years old. I live just outside Charleston, South Carolina, in the home my family built before the Civil War. For 40 years, I worked as an architect, specializing in historical restoration. If you've ever walked through a preserved mansion in Savannah or a plantation museum in the Carolinas, chances are you've seen my work. My life's philosophy was simple: preserve what time tries to erase. But I never thought the battle to preserve would be against my own blood. It happened on a humid Thursday morning in Charleston County Court, the kind of morning where the air feels like syrup and every word sticks. Lydia sat across the room beside her husband Chase, both dressed like success stories, navy suits, expensive smiles, and eyes that refused to meet mine. The clerk read her petition out loud. Ms. Lydia Holt requests legal guardianship over her father, Mr. Walter Gaines, citing diminished capacity and erratic financial behavior. Erratic financial behavior. They wanted the court to declare me incompetent, to strip away my rights, my home, and everything I'd built over 70 years of honest work. All because I refused to sell the Gaines Manor, the 18th century riverside estate that had been in our family for 4 generations. When the judge asked if I understood the petition, I nodded. "Oh, I understand, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. "I understand perfectly." Lydia looked down at her papers as if I were a stranger. And maybe in that moment I was. You see, that house wasn't just bricks and beams, it was my life's masterpiece. For 47 years, my late wife Margaret and I restored every inch of it with our bare hands. We peeled away plaster, uncovered hand-hewn timbers, and polished each brass hinge until it gleamed like sunlight on the Ashley River. When she passed, I promised her that house would stand long after both of us were gone. Now my daughter wanted to turn it into liquid cash. After the hearing, I walked out into the parking lot. The Charleston sun was blinding, bouncing off Chase's silver Tesla parked beside mine. He leaned against it, arms folded, smug as ever. "She'll get the papers through," he said. "You might as well sign before this gets ugly." I said nothing. He smiled, handed me a sealed envelope. "Think about it, old man." When I got home, the cicadas were screaming in the oaks that lined the driveway. The house stood silent, proud, unaware that it was being targeted by its own blood. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter, poured myself a glass of iced tea, and broke the seal. 3 lines typed in bold font: "Sell the place before you die. We deserve the money now." The glass trembled in my hand. The tea spilled across the marble like amber veins. Deserve. That word burned more than anything else. For decades, I'd paid Lydia's Yale tuition, her designer weddings, her business failures. Now I was being treated like an obstacle between them and their next luxury car. I walked through the quiet halls of Gaines Manor, my footsteps echoing on the old pine floors. The portraits of my ancestors watched silently, men and women who had survived wars, hurricanes, and centuries of decay. And here I was, undone not by time or nature, but by the greed of my own blood. In the drawing room, I ran my hand along the mantel Margaret once decorated with fresh magnolias. The scent still lingered in memory. She used to tell me Walter money reveals character faster than any storm. She was right. I sat down at her piano bench, feeling the weight of 71 years pressing against my chest. If this was how they saw me, an obstacle, then maybe it was time to show them what an obstacle can become when it fights back. I opened my old leather ledger, the same one I used for every restoration project. My handwriting still sharp. Every page a record of trust, of sacrifice, of names and numbers I never forgot. It was time to turn those pages into weapons. But before I tell you how everything unfolded, I want to ask something simple. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you once carried through every storm? If you have, you'll understand the silence that followed that letter, the kind of silence that only betrayal can teach. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know what part of the world you're in, because this story, my story, might sound a lot like yours. When you've spent a lifetime building, you start to think foundations can't crack. Not the kind made of wood and brick, and certainly not the kind made of love. But you'd be wrong. That night after court, I sat in my study surrounded by blueprints. Some mine, some Margaret sketches from decades ago. The lamp cast long shadows across the drafting table, and for the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I thought about Lydia, my only child. Born in the fall of '83, just as the magnolias were dropping their last blooms. She had Margaret's eyes soft green with that flicker of curiosity that always made me believe she'd change the world. And she did in a way. Just not the way I'd hoped. I was 30 when I opened my restoration firm Gaines Heritage Design. We rebuilt forgotten mansions, old courthouses, plantation homes, even libraries left to rot. Every paycheck went back into family Lydia's future, Margaret's care, the dream of something lasting. When Lydia got into Yale, I threw a party that filled this whole house. I remember telling Margaret, we did it. She'll never have to struggle like we did. But maybe struggle was what she needed most. Through college, I covered everything: tuition, housing, the study trips abroad. She wanted a vintage Mercedes when she graduated, said it matched her new image. I bought it. Then came the Savannah wedding, imported flowers, string quartet, rooftop reception overlooking the river. I paid every bill without blinking. That was my mistake. When Margaret got sick, pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't bargain, Lydia stayed distant. She said hospitals made her anxious, so I held Margaret's hand alone through 6 months of chemo and whispered all the things our daughter should have said. The night Margaret passed, she smiled faintly and told me, "Walter, remember, generosity doesn't mean surrender." I didn't understand then. Now I do. A year later, Lydia's husband Chase showed up at my door with a smile too wide and a story too smooth. Something about a can't-miss investment opportunity, a chain of beachside restaurants between Myrtle Beach and Hilton Head. He said Lydia was co-founder. They just needed seed money before the investors came on board. I wired $1.1 million the next day. They sent thank you flowers from Tiffany's, $300 worth of apology in a blue box. 6 months later, the business collapsed. When I asked what happened, Chase shrugged. COVID hit harder than expected. Investors pulled out. Not our fault. He said it like bad luck was a storm that only hit them, not the thousands of people who still went to work every morning. I covered their mortgage, their credit card debt, even the medical bills from Lydia's stress-induced migraines. All told $280,000 over 3 years. Every transfer labeled family assistance. Now sitting there in the half-light of my study, I realized I hadn't raised a daughter. I'd raised a dependent. A woman who'd learned comfort without cost, security without sweat. And that's on me. I looked up at Margaret's portrait, she in her blue dress, that half-smile she always wore when she wanted me to think harder. I could almost hear her voice. You can restore a house, Walter, but not a person who refuses to rebuild. The grandfather clock struck 10. Somewhere outside, the river wind shifted, bringing the smell of salt and rain. I poured myself a bourbon, our old ritual whenever we finished a project together. Only this time, the project was my own awakening. If they thought I was too old to fight back, They'd forgotten what 71 years of discipline looks like. They could twist my kindness, but they'd never understand my precision. I took a deep breath and whispered into the silence, "Margaret, I'm done being generous without wisdom. It's without." Then I opened her old Bible, the one she kept beside her sketchbook. A note in her handwriting marked the book of Proverbs, "When greed enters, love leaves quietly." I closed it slowly, feeling a peace I hadn't known in months. Maybe faith isn't about forgiving instantly. Maybe it's about waiting until the truth is undeniable. That night I prayed not for them, but for clarity. And for the first time I felt like God was listening. Morning light spilled across the drawing room, like liquid gold glinting off the framed blueprints that lined my walls. It was the same house I'd spent 40 years preserving, yet that morning it no longer felt like home. It felt like an asset under siege. And I, Walter Gaines, was done playing defense. When you've built your life on precision, on symmetry, proportion, and detail, revenge doesn't come as rage. It comes as architecture. You draft it carefully, one clause at a time. I poured black coffee into my mug, set it beside the ledger from last night, and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Eleanor Fitch speaking. Her voice hadn't changed. She was my attorney back when Margaret and I first established our estate plan, sharp as glass, calm as a surgeon. "Eleanor, it's Walter. I need to review the preservation documents for Gaines Manor." A pause, then a low whistle. "Walter, please tell me you didn't finally sell." "Not yet," I said. "But someone's trying to." Within an hour, we were sitting in her law office downtown. Sunlight filtered through the old shutters, painting stripes across stacks of files. Eleanor slid a thick folder across the table. "The Heritage Preservation Clause," she said. "You insisted on it back in 2019. I told you it was overkill." I smiled faintly. I prefer to think of it as foresight. She flipped open the file. The clause read in clear black ink, "If Gaines Manor is sold for commercial or private profit within 50 years of this agreement, all proceeds shall automatically transfer to the Charleston Historical Trust for the purposes of preservation and not to any heir or designee of the seller." There it was, the trap hidden in plain sight. A simple, airtight legal masterpiece, not out of malice but protection. Eleanor looked at me over her glasses. "They'll never see this coming, Walter. Not even a high-powered attorney could untangle it." "They won't get the chance," I replied. "Let them sell it. The moment they do, the money moves straight to the trust. And when they realize what they've done, I'll already be miles ahead." Eleanor leaned back, studying me. "You're not just protecting a house. You're teaching a lesson." I nodded. "Two of them. One about law and one about love." By noon, she had certified copies of the deed printed and notarized. I took mine home and placed it in the fireproof safe beneath Margaret's Bible. Then I sat at my desk and opened a new file labeled Restoration Project Family. The first page read simply, "Objective Accountability." I began listing every major expense I had covered for Lydia and Chase. Yale tuition, $240,000. Wedding, $126,000. Startup loan, $1.1 million. Mortgage bailouts, credit cards, medical bills, $280,000. Total support, $1,746,000. I stared at the number until it stopped looking like money and started looking like evidence. Each zero was a lesson unlearned. That afternoon, I drove to my bank, Charleston First National, and met with Thomas Kellen, the branch director I'd known for decades. We'd played golf together in better years. "Thomas," I said, "I need to restructure my accounts and transfer all my personal assets into the Margaret Foundation." Quietly. He studied me, eyes narrowing. "Is this about your daughter?" Let's just say it's about protecting what's left of my sanity. By 3 p.m., every account in my name had been reassigned to the Foundation Trust. If Lydia or Chase managed to seize power of attorney, they'd find nothing but dust. Thomas handed me the new documents. You're playing chess, Walter, not checkers. Architects don't play games, I said. We design the outcome. When I got home, I stood in the middle of the grand hall, the marble floors echoing under my shoes. I thought of Margaret again, her laughter, her faith, her belief that good things should last. Somewhere I hoped she was proud of how I'd learned to fight with dignity. The house creaked softly in the afternoon wind, as if whispering approval. And I whispered back, "They called me old and unfit. Let's see how unfit I look when the dust settles." I locked the safe, exhaled, and looked toward the future, a future I was now designing with surgical precision. Tomorrow, the real restoration would begin. The Charleston County Courthouse looked different that morning, not because of the marble pillars or the oak benches polished by generations, but because this time, I walked in with purpose. The first hearing had been humiliation. This one would be education. Lydia and Chase were already there, sitting with a new attorney, some slick young man in an Italian suit, half her age, twice her arrogance. He was the kind who thought confidence was a substitute for wisdom. He stood as I entered. "Mr. Gaines," he said, "you look well for 71. I smiled thinly. "I age better than contracts, son. Let's see how you do under cross-examination." The judge, a woman about my age with silver hair and a sharp gaze, called the session to order. Chase had filed an emergency petition, this time not for guardianship, but to force the sale of Gaines Manor. They claimed I was emotionally unstable and neglecting estate maintenance. The irony was delicious. Neglect I'd just completed a $400,000 restoration on the West Wing. Paid every contractor in full, every permit up to date. They weren't fighting for preservation. They were fighting for liquidation. Their lawyer strutted forward, papers in hand. "Your Honor, my clients simply want to protect their father's legacy before mismanagement reduces it to dust." The judge turned to me. "Mr. Gaines, would you like to respond?" I rose, slowly adjusting my glasses. "Your Honor, may I approach?" She nodded. I carried a leather folder to the bench and opened it, revealing color-coded financial reports, notarized documents, and a 30-page tax summary. "These are my records," I said evenly. "Every payment, every restoration cost, every financial transaction for the past 20 years. They've all been audited, verified, and filed with both the county assessor and the preservation board." The judge flipped through the documents. Her expression didn't change, but her eyebrows lifted just slightly. "Everything appears remarkably detailed, Mr. Gaines." "That's because I built my life on details, Your Honor." Then I turned eyes on Lydia and Chase. "And if my memory's as bad as they claim, how is it?" "I remember every check I've written for their benefit." I gestured toward the clerk. "Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to submit an itemized list of financial support I've provided to my daughter and her husband." She nodded. The clerk distributed copies. On the first page, bold letters read, "Cumulative support provided to Lydia and Chase Holt, $1.746. Below each entry was dated, signed, and labeled Yale University tuition wedding expenses, business startup, loan debt consolidation, medical bills. As the judge skimmed, I spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Your Honor, they say I'm reckless with money. But what I see here is recklessness born from generosity. I may have made mistakes as a father, but incompetence wasn't one of them." Chase's smirk faltered. Lydia shifted in her seat, eyes fixed on the floor. Their attorney tried to object. Irrelevant to the current petition, overruled, said the judge. Relevance stands. Financial history pertains directly to the petitioner's claim of instability. I nodded in gratitude. Then calmly, I delivered the final blow. Your Honor, I'd also like to submit into evidence the Heritage Preservation Clause attached to the deed of Gaines Manor. It ensures that if the property is sold for private gain within 50 years, all proceeds automatically transfer to the Charleston Historical Trust. The room went silent. You could hear the ceiling fan hum. The judge leaned back. Is that true, Mr. and Mrs. Holt? Chase blinked, blindsided. He glanced at Lydia, who whispered, I didn't know. Their lawyer fumbled through his notes. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. It's entirely legal, Eleanor Fitch. My attorney interrupted smoothly. And properly notarized by the county clerk's office in 2019. You may verify. The judge nodded, impressed. Well, it seems the law favors preparation. She turned to Lydia and Chase. Petition denied. Bang. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Lydia's shoulders slumped. Chase looked like a man who just realized he was standing on a trap door. The judge dismissed the case, and I gathered my papers, slowly savoring the sound of their silence. As I stepped into the hallway, reporters waiting outside called my name Mr. Gaines. Is it true your own daughter sued you? I didn't answer. I simply said, every house has ghosts. Mine just happens to be alive. Then I kept walking, sunlight spilling through the courthouse doors like redemption. For the first time in months, I felt control returning, steady, deliberate, earned. But I knew this wasn't the end. People who feed on entitlement don't stop when they lose. They double down. And when they did, I'd be ready. If you're still with me so far, type 1 in the comments to let me know you're following this story, because from here, the game of legacies is about to turn into something much darker. It was a quiet Tuesday when the betrayal came dressed as paperwork. I'd spent the morning pruning the magnolias Margaret planted 30 years ago, small rituals that made this house feel alive again. The air smelled of salt and rain from the Ashley River, and for the first time in weeks, I felt peace creeping back into my bones. Then my phone buzzed. A polite, chirpy voice greeted me. Good afternoon, Mr. Gaines. This is Natalie from Southern Estates Realty. Just calling to confirm closing on the Gaines Manor property. I froze. Closing, I repeated. On what property? Gaines Manor, sir. 218 Ashley River Road. The sale was finalized yesterday. Cash buyer, $4.8 million. Congratulations. For a second, the room tilted. My grip on the pruning shears tightened until my knuckles turned white. I didn't sell my house, I said quietly. Sir, the deed transfer was filed under power of attorney signed by your daughter, Mrs. Lydia Holt. There it was, the knife. Quiet, sharp, familiar. By the time I hung up, my heartbeat was hammering like a carpenter's mallet. I called Eleanor Fitch immediately. She answered on the first ring. Eleanor, they sold the house. A pause, paper rustling. Then her calm, deliberate tone. Good. Let them. I frowned. Good, Walter, she said, you remember the clause. If Gaines Manor is sold for private gain, the proceeds automatically transfer to the Charleston Historical Trust. They just activated the trap you built. I sank into my chair, staring out at the magnolias swaying in the wind. After months of scheming, they'd walked right into their own undoing. Eleanor continued. I'll confirm with the Register of Deeds and the Trust's financial office. Once the transfer posts, the funds will bypass their accounts entirely. You'll want to be home when the realization hits them. I smiled, not out of spite, but relief. For the first time in years, justice wasn't just a dream. It was a line item. That evening I poured a glass of bourbon and waited. Charleston sunsets have a way of turning the river copper. It felt fitting. Some debts, after all, had to be paid in full. At 8:14 p.m., my phone lit up with Lydia's name. I let it ring, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. Dad. Her voice was trembling. Something's wrong with the sale. The bank says the money went to a historical foundation, not us. What happened? Exactly what was supposed to happen, I said calmly. What you set us up. I set up the house, I replied. You just made your choice. In the background, I heard Chase shouting. This is fraud. We'll sue him. I couldn't help but laugh, low, steady, unhurried. Go ahead, I said. But you might want to read the clause before you embarrass yourselves in front of another judge. Lydia started crying. Dad, please. We didn't mean to. Chase said we could. You signed it, Lydia. You signed without reading. That's not betrayal. That's negligence. Chase grabbed the phone. His voice was venom. You robbed us, old man. No, I said, leaning back in my chair. I restored balance. Same thing I've done my whole life. He cursed, threatened lawyers, lawsuits, reputations. I let him rant until his words turned into noise. When he finally stopped, I spoke quietly. You called me too old to handle my own estate. But tell me, son, who's the fool now? Silence. Then the line went dead. The next morning, Eleanor called again. It's done, she said. Funds officially transferred to the Charleston Historical Trust, $4.8 million tax-exempt. And the local news picked up the story. What story? I asked. She chuckled. The headline reads, Historic Gaines Manor Gifted to Preservation Fund by Owner's Family. You're being hailed as a hero of Charleston heritage. I laughed, the sound echoing through the empty hallways. They wanted fortune, I said softly, and gave away legacy instead. On my desk, the letter Chase had written weeks ago, sell the place before you die. We deserve the money now. Lay beside today's newspaper. The contrast was perfect. Sometimes the universe doesn't punish. It just balances the ledger. I folded the newspaper, poured another drink, and whispered toward Margaret's old portrait. You always said truth has its own timing. Looks like it just rang the bell. The magnolias outside rustled almost like applause. And for the first time since the courtroom, I allowed myself a smile that reached my eyes. 2 days after the sale, Charleston woke up to headlines. Historic gains. Manor gifted to Charleston trust owner praised for preserving heritage. There it was, front page of the Post and Courier, right beneath the morning light streaming through my kitchen window. The irony was almost poetic. The world thought I had donated the house. They didn't know it was my daughter and son-in-law who had done it unintentionally, beautifully, perfectly. I sat at the breakfast table spreading orange marmalade on toast, the way Margaret used to. Routine was comforting, almost holy. The air smelled like roasted coffee and redemption. By 9 a.m., the phone started ringing. Reporters, preservationists, even the mayor's office. They wanted to interview the philanthropist architect who had just given away one of Charleston's most valuable properties. For the first time in a long while, I let the calls go to voicemail. Justice, I realized, doesn't need an audience. Eleanor stopped by that afternoon, files under her arm, the faintest smile on her face. You've made history, Walter, she said, setting the papers down. The trust board is naming the West Gallery after you and Margaret. I poured her coffee, the kind we used to share during renovation projects years ago. Eleanor, I didn't do this to be honored. I did it to be free. She nodded slowly. Freedom's expensive, but you paid for it the right way. She slid one document across the table, the final confirmation from the bank. $4.8 million fully transferred. Chase and Lydia had no claim left, no appeal that could survive the airtight clause. Their accounts, Eleanor said, had already been frozen by the IRS pending investigation for false power of attorney filings. "They'll come crawling back," she said quietly. "They always do." "I know," I replied. "And when they do, I'll listen, but I won't rescue." That night, Charleston's riverfront glowed in silver and gold. I walked the pier, a lone cane tapping against the planks, the sound of distant jazz drifting from French Quarter taverns. Somewhere along the river church, bells began to ring. I stopped and looked toward the steeple of St. Michael's, Margaret's favorite church. I hadn't stepped inside since her funeral. Until that moment, I wasn't sure I could. But something in me shifted. Justice without grace is just vengeance in better clothes, and Margaret had always believed that faith must outlive bitterness. I climbed the stone steps and entered the sanctuary. It was nearly empty, the candles flickering against the old pews. An elderly priest glanced up and smiled. "Evening, Mr. Gaines." "It's been a while." I nodded. "Too long?" He gestured toward the altar. "You came to give thanks, didn't you?" I hesitated, then said, "Maybe. Or maybe I came to remember who I was before this all turned into war." The priest chuckled softly. "Then you're exactly where you should be." I knelt at the front pew, and for the first time in months I didn't feel anger, only gratitude. Gratitude that the truth had surfaced without me having to shout. Gratitude that justice, when built on patience and precision, becomes its own sermon. I closed my eyes and whispered, "And thank you, Margaret, for teaching me that faith isn't the absence of struggle, it's the strength to face it without losing your soul." When I opened them, the stained glass light washed over the altar like liquid color. It felt like she was there, not in ghost or voice, but in peace. The next morning, Eleanor called again. "News is spreading nationally," she said. "Preservation groups want to partner with your foundation, and Walter, Lydia, and Chase. They're being investigated for deed fraud. Local police are coordinating with the IRS." I exhaled slowly. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. "They won't go to jail forever," I said, "but they'll have to live with what they did. That's a longer sentence than any cell could give." Eleanor smiled softly. "You sound like a man who's found faith again." I looked out the window toward the river where the morning sun danced on the water. Maybe she was right. Because standing there in the quiet of my kitchen, I finally understood. Faith doesn't mean trusting people. It means trusting that truth will outlive their lies. And in that sunlight, I whispered, "Stixi." Justice's faith in motion. The call came on a gray November morning, the kind of day when the clouds hang so low, you can almost touch regret. I was on the porch oiling the hinges of my old rocking chair when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved, but I knew that country code by heart. New Jersey. I let it ring twice. 3 times. Then I answered. "Dad." Her voice cracked on the first word. "Lydia, Dad, please don't hang up. I just need you to listen." I leaned back in the chair, eyes on the slow-moving river. "I'm listening." She took a shaky breath. "Chase is gone. He left 3 weeks ago. Said he couldn't take the pressure. The police questioned us about the sale. They froze our accounts. I'm working part-time cleaning houses, Dad. I can't even afford rent next month." Her words spilled fast, desperate, like someone trying to outswim guilt. I let the silence stretch just enough for the weight to settle. Finally, I said, "And why are you calling me now? Because you're my father," she cried. "Because I have nowhere else to go." There it was, the familiar refrain. Not "I'm sorry," not "I was wrong," just need. Lydia, I said slowly, do you remember the day you stood in that courtroom and called me unfit? Her breath hitched. I was angry. Chase convinced me. No, I interrupted gently. You convinced yourself that money meant safety. That control meant love. Chase just gave you the excuse. I know, she whispered, and I hate myself for it. I wake up every morning and hear Mom's voice in my head telling me what I did. That stopped me. I hadn't heard her mention Margaret in years. I looked out across the lawn. The magnolias had shed their last blossoms, bare branches reaching toward a gray sky. What do you want from me, Lydia? Just a chance, she said through tears. I'm not asking for the house or money. I just need somewhere to stay, a place to start over. Please, Dad. I could hear a train passing in the background, on her end the sound of movement distance escape, and something inside me shifted. For a moment I saw her at 6 years old running barefoot through these same magnolia trees, chasing fireflies, while Margaret laughed from the porch. That little girl had trusted me completely. But that girl had grown into a woman who'd sold her soul for convenience. I closed my eyes and said the hardest words I've ever spoken. No. There was silence, long, stunned, hollow. No, she repeated. Not yet, I said. You need to learn what building something truly means. Until you do, this house, this family can't hold you. Not again. Her voice broke. Dad, I'm scared. I don't know who to trust. That's what growing up feels like, I said softly. Scary, uncertain, real. She sobbed, but I didn't interrupt. When she finally whispered, I love you, I said I know. But love isn't alone, Lydia. It's earned through honesty. I ended the call, not in anger, but in peace. The river wind carried a chill that cut through the last warmth of autumn. I sat there, hands folded over the worn wood of the chair Margaret bought for our first anniversary. The quiet felt heavier than usual. Inside, the clock struck noon. The echo traveled through the empty hallways of a home that had seen every kind of silence. The silence of love, of grief, of betrayal, and now of resolve. I walked back into the living room and looked at Margaret's portrait. I did what you'd have done, I murmured. I didn't close the door forever. I just kept it locked until she learns to knock. The words hung in the air like a prayer I didn't know I'd said. Outside, the sun broke briefly through the clouds, lighting the magnolia branches in soft gold. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for protecting my peace. Because sometimes love isn't about saving. It's about allowing the fall. Only then can the rebuilding begin. 2 years passed like slow tide, imperceptible when you're in it, undeniable when you look back. Charleston changed as it always does. New restaurants filled old facades. Tourists replaced the locals who'd once known every brick by name. But Gaines Manor, now the Margaret and Walter Gaines Museum of Preservation, stood untouched. Every tour, every article, every visiting architect reminded me that legacy once saved starts to live a life of its own. As for me, I had traded courtrooms for classrooms. Once a week, I lectured at the College of Charleston's School of Architecture, teaching young students how to restore what history almost forgot. They called me Mr. Gaines, but I insisted on Walter. Titles, I'd learned, meant less than character. My cottage on Folly Beach was small, 2 rooms, 1 porch, and the sound of waves like an old friend that never asked for anything. There was peace there. The kind that money can't buy and regret can't steal. Every morning I brewed coffee in the same copper kettle Margaret once used, then walked the shoreline. Sand between my toes, sunlight across the water, it was my new version of prayer. Sometimes I'd see young couples passing by arguing about careers, mortgages, little dreams that seemed so urgent. And I'd smile because I'd once thought the same things mattered most. They don't. Character does. Integrity does. Then, one Thursday in late spring, I found an envelope in my mailbox. The handwriting stopped me cold. Neat, cursive, familiar. Lydia. I carried it inside hands, trembling, sat by the window and opened it slowly. Dad. It took me a long time to write this, mostly because shame doesn't flow easily from a pen. You were right about everything, about Chase, about me, about what I called love and what it really was. I wanted comfort, not connection. Money, not meaning. When you said no, I thought you'd stopped loving me. I see now that was the moment you actually started saving me. I left New Jersey. I work now at a flower shop in Savannah. Small place, quiet, owned by a widow who taught me how to live simply again. She says soil heals everything if you let your hands get dirty long enough. I earn little, but it's mine. For the first time in my life, I fall asleep tired instead of hollow. Every Sunday, I visit a small church. The same hymn plays sometimes, the one Mom loved. When it does, I sit in the back and pray that I become someone she'd be proud of. Maybe one day you will too. Thank you for teaching me what boundaries mean, and for proving that love isn't always soft, it's also steel. With love, Lydia. The page blurred as I finished reading. I realized I was crying quietly the way men of my generation were never taught to. Outside, seagulls circled the surf. The air smelled of salt and forgiveness. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my old leather ledger right between the pages where I'd once recorded every dollar I'd spent to save her. Now it held something far more valuable, proof that pain, if endured with patience, can grow into wisdom. A week later, the Charleston Historical Trust invited me to speak at a small ceremony marking the museum's 2nd anniversary. I almost declined, but something told me to go. The gardens were in bloom, rows of white magnolias framing the old portico. As I walked through the gate, I noticed a young woman standing near the fountain, arranging flowers into a bronze vase. Her hair was tied back, her hands steady. When she looked up, her eyes were the same soft green that had once belonged to a little girl chasing fireflies through this same garden. "Lydia," I whispered. She smiled faintly. "Hi, Dad." For a moment, words failed both of us. Then she said, "They hired me to do the floral arrangements for the museum. I didn't realize it was for your event." I chuckled softly. Seems like fate wanted one more restoration project. We stood there, surrounded by magnolias, silence speaking louder than any apology could. Then she said, "You were right. Some houses can be rebuilt. Some hearts just need longer blueprints." I reached out, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart," I said quietly. "Some hearts just need to remember what home feels like." She nodded, tears glinting like morning dew. That evening back at my cottage, I wrote one final note in my journal. Some restorations take wood and nails. Others take time and silence. The first fixes walls. The second heals souls. I closed the book, looked out toward the darkening ocean, and smiled. The world felt softer again, as if grace itself had come home. Spring came early that year. Charleston wore its finest colors, azaleas blushing pink along the cobblestone streets, magnolias heavy with promise. Even the air felt lighter, as if the city itself had forgiven something. The Margaret and Walter Gaines Museum of Preservation was reopening its West Garden after a long renovation. The trust had invited donors, historians, and students. But what made me say yes wasn't the press or the accolades. It was the letter I'd received the week before. "Dad, I'd love to see you at the garden opening. I've been helping with the floral design. There's something I want to give you in person. Lydia. It had taken 2 years of silence, 1 letter of repentance, and 1 fleeting meeting at that fountain. But I knew this time felt different. Real. The day of the event, the sun poured through the oaks in ribbons of light. The museum's iron gates glimmered, polished clean for the occasion. I walked in, slowly leaning on the same cane Margaret gave me on my 65th birthday, mahogany carved with vines. Each step echoed across the marble like punctuation marks in a long sentence finally reaching its period. Guests were already gathered, champagne glasses clinking, laughter rising like music. Eleanor Fitch waved from near the steps. "Walter," she said, "today belongs to you." I smiled. "No, Eleanor. It belongs to what we refused to sell." She chuckled. "Same thing." I excused myself and wandered toward the garden, the place Margaret had loved most. When we restored this house decades ago, she'd insisted on planting 99 white roses there. "Leave room for 1 more," she said then. "We'll know when it's time." That final spot had stayed empty all these years. Now the garden looked transformed. Fresh soil, new blossoms. And standing beside that last open patch of earth was Lydia, hair pulled back, wearing a simple cream dress smudged with dirt at the hem. Not a trace of the luxury or entitlement that once defined her. Just a quiet kind of beauty, the kind hardship carves. When she saw me, she wiped her hands on her apron, nervous smile, trembling. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, sweetheart." For a moment, we just stood there, 2 people bound by blood, scarred by choices, reunited by time. "I wanted to plant something for Mom," she said softly, kneeling beside that last empty space. From a small crate, she lifted a rose bush, white petals, roots wrapped in burlap. "Magnolia white," she explained. "It's from a nursery outside Savannah. They said it only blooms when it feels at home." Her voice cracked on that last word. I crouched beside her knees, protesting heart quiet. We worked in silence, pressing soil around the roots. Her hands were steady now, no diamond rings, no trembling. Just focus, care. When the plant was firm, she whispered, "For Mom." I placed my hand over hers, and for the lesson she left us both. She looked up, tears streaking the dirt on her cheeks. "I don't deserve forgiveness, Dad." I shook my head. "Forgiveness isn't a reward, Lydia. It's a foundation. You build on it every day until it stops cracking." She nodded slowly, eyes shining. "Then I'll build." The crowd began to gather behind us, the ribbon cutting moments away. Eleanor approached with a microphone, smiling knowingly. "Mr. Gaines," she said to me, "would you like to say a few words before we dedicate the garden?" I looked at Lydia, then back to the guests. "No speeches," I said. "Just this: sometimes preserving history means letting go of pain. Sometimes it means giving the next generation a chance to do better." The audience applauded softly, respectfully. Lydia wiped her eyes and stood beside me as the ribbon fell away, revealing the plaque beneath the magnolia tree. "The Margaret and Walter Gaines Garden of Renewal, where what's broken learns to bloom again." The words shimmered in the light. Lydia reached for my hand, tentative at first, then sure. Her grip was warm, real, not asking, not begging, just there. And for the first time in years, I didn't see my failure as a father. I saw my success as a man. That night, after the crowd had gone and the lights dimmed, Lydia and I sat on the garden bench Margaret once claimed as hers. Fireflies floated above the roses. "Do you think she'd forgive me?" Lydia asked. I smiled, gazing up at the stars. "She already did, Lydia. The day you learned to plant instead of take." We sat in silence, watching the white roses sway in the evening breeze, the final one, the newest one, already reaching for the light. That night, Charleston was quiet. The city's heartbeat had slowed after the garden ceremony. Lanterns dimmed, footsteps faded down the cobblestones, and somewhere beyond the river, a single saxophone played the blues to no one in particular. I sat alone on the museum's back terrace, overlooking the magnolia trees, glowing silver under the moon. The newly planted rose bush swayed gently, petals open to the night. It looked fragile, but I knew better. Things that survive storms never really stay fragile. The staff had all gone home. Lydia, too. Before she left, she'd turned to me at the gate and said quietly, "I'm not going to ask for anything anymore, Dad. I just want to live in a way that honors what you taught me." And then she hugged me, not the hurried, superficial kind, but the long, trembling kind that says I'm home, even if I don't live here anymore. When she walked away, I watched until her figure disappeared beyond the oak-lined road. The same road Margaret and I once took every Sunday to church. It struck me then, this full circle. A home restored, a daughter redeemed, a man finally at peace with the cost of both. I lit the lantern beside me and opened the worn leather Bible that Margaret left behind. The same one that had carried me through every battle from the courtroom to the quiet mornings by the sea. Inside, her handwriting filled the margins, verses, dates, little reminders. But one note written in fading ink had always haunted me. When faith feels heavy, remember it's not meant to be carried. It's meant to carry you. For years, I thought I'd lost that faith somewhere between betrayal and bitterness. But sitting there with the garden breathing below and the moon climbing high above Charleston, I realized faith hadn't left me. It had just been waiting until I was humble enough to see it again. I whispered into the night, "Thank you, Margaret. You were right. Even faith needs boundaries, but love needs time." And I finally understood what forgiveness really was. Not the soft escape from pain, but the steady choice to remember it without bitterness. When the wind picked up, I closed the Bible and looked across the estate. The marble plaque shimmered under the moonlight, where what's broken learns to bloom again. Some visitors would think it was a poetic phrase, but I knew better. It was a map, a reminder that rebirth isn't magic. It's maintenance. In that moment, I imagined the future long after I'm gone. Maybe school children will walk these halls tracing the wood panels I restored by hand. Maybe a young architect will stand where I once stood, sketching a new dream while the river hums below. And maybe Lydia will visit, sometimes leave a fresh rose on her mother's bench, whispering a prayer instead of a plea. That's legacy. Not wealth, not buildings, but change that outlives apology. The lantern flickered almost out of oil. I leaned back, listening to the sound of frogs by the riverbank and distant laughter from the city. Somewhere a bell tolled 9 times, deep, patient final. I smiled. "Good night, Charleston," I murmured. "You kept your soul tonight." Then I looked toward heaven, where the clouds had parted just enough to reveal one bright, steady star. And I knew, even after everything, I was still being watched over, still being carried. Faith had been my blueprint, mercy my restoration, and love was the fire that kept me rebuilding. If you believe that faith and forgiveness can rebuild even the most broken families, then don't forget to subscribe to Brian's Stories. Share this video with someone who still believes in second chances, and tell me in the comments what part of this story touched you most. Because somewhere out there, another heart might be waiting to bloom again.